I'll be able to look at those. And I will also make sure that in addition to having the recording available later, I'll be uploading the slides for you to look at as well. So like Kale mentioned, my name is Julia Gahn. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the Prevention and Education Manager for the Burt Nash Community Mental Health Center located in Lawrence, Kansas. We serve Douglas County, Kansas, and it's a privilege to be with you today. I'm going to talk, and I know this is not necessarily about mental health specifically, but I'm starting from when we think about mindfully managing stress and supporting others, we really want to see mental health as this continuum, right? Sometimes we hear folks say, oh, somebody has mental health, and we immediately think that means there's a crisis or there's a problem or something not good is happening. And really want to come back and remind us that we actually all have mental health. We all have mental well-being. This doesn't mean it's just some sort of condition. It's rather our full experience of our mental well-being. And it's dynamic. It changes. It changes just like our physical health changes. Sometimes in response to things that are happening around us, sometimes in response to things that are happening inside of us. And sometimes a person might have a diagnosable mental health disorder or a mental illness. Other times, a person might still be struggling, even if they don't necessarily meet the criteria for a diagnosis. And so in this session, we're not really so concerned about diagnosing or anything along those lines, just really want to talk about paying attention both to what's happening with ourselves and what might be happening with people that we're interacting with. And so the kind of starting place for this, I was thinking about signs and symptoms. And, you know, as home visitors, as people who are interacting with folks a lot already, you have things that you look for, right? There are things that you're paying attention to, that you're mindful of. And same thing is true around our mental well-being. Signs and symptoms, signs are those things that we can see, things that might be changes in mood or changes in behavior or changes in thoughts, but I guess less in thoughts, because that's really where our symptoms are, right? So internal experience, things like emotions or thinking, those things are happening inside. And so unless we tell somebody about those experiences, no one else necessarily knows that we're having them. So we're listening for those things in conversation as well, and also paying attention to them for ourselves. Now, in terms of what some of these changes might look like, you know, we might see that somebody has become more irritable or grumpy. Maybe they're overly excited or overly nervous or very sad or angry. Some sort of change in mood might be an indication someone is struggling. Behavior is actually one of those things that I think is one of the biggest conveyors of things that might be going on. And I imagine this might be true in your experience as well, right? We see changes in behavior and get curious as to why. And so especially around our mental well-being, some of those changes in behavior that could indicate someone's struggling is when somebody's spending more time alone, they've started using alcohol or other substances, or they're increasing that usage. Maybe they've stopped taking care of themselves, or they're spending all of their time working on their appearance. Maybe we see changes in work performance or activities. And sometimes when we hear that change in work performance, we automatically think that somebody's not doing what they usually do, right? That they're actually not doing as much as they're supposed to be doing. But overworking and perfectionism are also changes in behavior that could be an indication that someone's struggling, right? That can also be a way that people cope with the experiences that they're having. The last piece on signs and symptoms are just those changes in thoughts. And again, this is a really high overview of some of those things that we're looking for when we move into kind of managing our own stress as well as supporting other folks. But especially in terms of change in thoughts, this is the stuff that we can be thinking about for ourselves, right? Things that we might notice in our own experience. So maybe somebody is having a lot of worst case scenario thinking, or maybe they have thoughts about harming themselves or others, or thoughts about death, dying, or suicide. Maybe somebody's experiencing delusions or hallucinations. any of these types of changes in thoughts, right, requires a lot of support and intervention, right? That requires us to respond to the experience that either we're having or that somebody that we're in relationship, either professionally or personally, that we're supporting, connecting them into help as well. Now, one of the tools that I think is really useful in terms of thinking about signs and symptoms is this simple mental health pain scale. And I'm actually going to move over to the website for you to see this over here, if I can figure it out in just a second. I have too many screens open, apparently. I'm sure other folks have had that experience. Oh, where'd it go? There it is. All right, so you should be able to see this simple mental health pain scale up here. One of the things that I think is important for us to keep in mind is that if we are experiencing a physical health issue, we have a much better idea about how to talk about it, right? We have a much better idea about whether it's time for us to take an ibuprofen and a nap, or call a friend and have some quality time with somebody we care about, or but we know if we need to take an ibuprofen, take a nap, or if we need to call the doctor, go to the doctor, have a checkup, or if we need to go to urgent care, if something like that is happening with our physical health. This is less likely with our mental health. We have a much harder time thinking to ourselves, I would feel better if I just took a night off, or if I saw some close friends, or maybe I need to go ahead and start therapy or go back to therapy, or maybe it's time to explore medication. With our mental health, we just don't have as clear of an indicator of what those things might look like. And so the simple mental health pain scale was created by a person with lived experience with a variety of mental health issues. And it really goes into kind of a discussion of, okay, I've got the emotional equivalent of a headache versus now easy things are becoming really difficult versus now I can't hide my struggles anymore, right? Everything seems to really be impacted by my mental well-being. And so I think that this can be a useful tool for ourselves as well as for the people that we might be interacting with in terms of thinking about, okay, so where am I at? What is the experience that I'm having? And is it time for me to connect and to help? Or is this something that I can manage with a little bit more intentional self-care or something else? So the piece of this, just kind of briefly in terms of thinking about how we might help before we move more into mindfulness and self-care pieces, we really want to keep in mind that we don't have to have all of the answers in order to be able to support somebody or connect them into further help. One of the most important things that we can do in terms of helping anyone else as well as helping ourselves is by paying attention. Right, by recognizing our own emotions, by recognizing what's happening with the people that we're interacting with. We can do this in part by checking in regularly and spending time on that type of information. It doesn't have to be a lot of time, but sometimes that simple check-in can help us a lot, both to kind of see where folks are at and convey to others where we're at when we might need support as well. We'll talk more about self-care as we kind of move into this next piece, but that is a huge way for us to actually help other people, right? Is by actually taking care of ourselves. We're not able to pour from an empty cup, right? So this is very much, for us to be effective in our work, that also means that we need to be taking care of ourselves as well. We don't have to necessarily fix anything. Oftentimes, folks really just want us to listen. And it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to talk with a doctor. It's okay to reach out to your community mental health center. And there's always a suicide prevention lifeline as well. So we have that up here, 800-273-TALK. We can contact that hotline for a variety of issues and concerns, not necessarily just suicide. I am going to go ahead and drop in the chat. Oh, I can't do that. I can't add a file in here. so I'm not going to drop in the chat a file, but I will upload it into the program notes on the website as well. So with some additional hotlines like the Trevor Project, the Veterans Hotline, the Spanish language version of these hotlines as well. Now, the other piece that kind of goes hand in hand with kind of supporting other folks is knowing how we can talk about this with other people. And so I'm just going to show a brief video here. Maybe there's a couple of Brene Brown fans on the call, maybe just a few. But I love this description of empathy versus sympathy. And so when we think about how we're supporting somebody else or how we're engaging in conversation, this is really going to help us frame how do we do this from that place of empathy. So I'm going to go ahead and start this video, and we'll watch it, and then we'll be back in our slideshow before you know it.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, woo, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right. I just really appreciate the frame there for what this looks like. Now, when we think about supporting other folks and taking care of ourselves, help can look a lot of different ways. Sometimes it is that self-care piece. Sometimes it's talking with friends and family. Sometimes it's therapy. Sometimes it's inpatient or more intensive outpatient services. Sometimes this involves medication. Sometimes we might use other types of technological supports as well. But again, when we think about help, it can look a lot of different ways. And so we'll talk as we move into the next part of our discussion. We're going to talk more specifically around stress and how this connects into both our mental well-being as well as some of the things that we can do via self-care that can help us process stress. There's a really great book out there that I do also want to recommend. It's called Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. And they have just a really great discussion of more and additional ways of kind of understanding how we process stress. And so when we think about stress, right, sometimes even just saying stress makes me feel a little stressed out, right? But stress is really just the way we're responding to the differences or the changes around or in us. Sometimes stress is good. And in fact, we need some stress in our lives, right? This is the stuff that helps us get excited about taking something on. It helps us move through a project. It helps us get to the airport on time, all those different things. We need a little bit of stress. And that's when we might feel challenged or engaged with some of the stuff that we're doing. But oftentimes what happens is we're actually experiencing too much stress. And because of the amount of stress that we're experiencing, we're unable to adjust to that level of stress in our systems. This could be due to too many changes all at once, or it could be due to kind of a stress that comes from loss or fear. It might do with our inability to control a situation, right? Our lack of certainty, which I think has been actually like the theme for 2020 to 2021 so far, right? This lack of certainty. And so when we think about what we do with this stress, even if the stressor goes away, right? We get to the end of the day, we clock out, the day's stress is gone, but we all know that we're going to carry some of that with us, right? Just because the immediate stressor has been kind of taken care of, right? The stress is still in our bodies. And so this stress, it shows up in a number of different ways. Psychologically, it can negatively impact our moods, our thoughts, and emotions when stress gets too big. It might cause us to have trouble sleeping. We might have headaches or concentration issues. It can increase our irritability. All sorts of things can happen psychologically associated with that stress. And it also shows up physically. And so I'm curious for you all, and you can drop this in the chat, where does stress show up for you? Where does it show up in your body? So we've got up here things like, how stress can negatively impact our physical systems. Sometimes that means we get headaches or stomach cramps, or we get sick more easily, right? Our immune systems are compromised. But what about other folks? Where do you find that you store your stress? And you can just drop that in the chat box. I personally store a fair amount in my neck and shoulders too. Look where you have the same thought here. And right, the fatigue, I think that's a really good point, Jennifer, right? This is showing up everywhere and it's resulting in that fatigue. Neck and shoulders, stress bumps, right? It shows up in a lot of physical manifestations. It also impacts our diet, right? Sometimes, at least for me, I end up kind of emotionally eating or eating things that I would not necessarily be thinking, oh, this is going to help me feel better, but it's comfort food instead. For other people, they may have a really hard time having an appetite. So it can show up a number of different ways. Brain, stomach, immune system, brain fog, right? Absolutely. That's a big stress response. Fatigue, shoulders. We're seeing this in a lot of different places in our body. And the thing is, right, it keeps coming back, right? So like maybe we take care of it for a little bit. We have a good vacation and then we're back. And then all of a sudden it's right there again. And so when we think about how to manage stress, we really want to think about things that we might be doing on a fairly regular basis. And so the other piece of this is resiliency. So the way that we respond to all of this stress up here, right? If we adapt or have developed some of that resiliency, that can help us manage our stress more effectively. And sometimes I worry about the word resilience. Sometimes people think, oh, well, you can just bounce back, right? So we don't have to address the underlying stressor ultimately because you can just bounce back. And so I don't want us to think about it that way. I think I want us to think about it more as a skill set that we can develop and enhance to help us respond to the experiences that we're having, right? This doesn't necessarily mean we don't need to do systems work too, right? This can be a both and piece, but really, as we're effectively managing stress, this actually helps us develop our resiliency and improve our resiliency too, which is something that we might frequently be doing with other people that we're working with as well, in terms of helping folks enhance their own skill sets here. Some of the different ways that we can nurture resilience before we really move more deeply into self-care, but this is going to be much more of a big picture type of self-care. But what are those places where we have a sense of personal control, right? Where we can see the impact of our decisions, the impact of our work. If we can help cultivate that sense of personal control, that actually helps us feel more agency in terms of responding. We feel that we have more ability to respond because we have cultivated that sense of control over it. So maybe it's less about doing something big and more about, in this moment, I can decide how I'm going to respond. In this moment, I'm going to make a choice about what's next, right? And developing that personal control, that sense of personal control really helps us nurture resilience. We've got up here that pursuit of personally meaningful tasks. And so this looks different for everybody, right? For some of us, this might look like our day job. For some of us, this might look like our volunteer work. It might look like our families. It might look like, the things that we're doing on the evenings and the weekends. It can really be any of those places, but we want to make sure that somewhere in our life, we are doing things that we find meaningful, and those things that are personally meaningful to us. Healthy lifestyle choices, we'll talk more about effective stress management, but there are some things that we can do on a regular basis around, having enough water, getting enough sleep, that can really help promote our just ability to physically respond to stress too. And then we want to think about our social supports. Now, I am an extrovert. I don't know how many people on here are extroverts or introverts, and it seemed too complicated to try and add a poll in here. I'm not trying to convert everyone to be an extrovert, right? I live with a pair of introverts. My husband and son are both that way. And we all need people, right? Whether it's a group of people or one or two, right? We need people in our lives. And so really thinking about who those social supports are can be a real key piece of connecting in. And yes, wonderful to have a 95% introvert here. That's good news. Now, one of those things with social supports, right? There's supports as we're connecting. And so sometimes this means, really paying attention to, am I taking time to talk with or text, the people that I want to be close to, right? Are we meaningfully connected on some sort of regular basis, that being decided by you? But that's going to help cultivate our social support. It's going to be those folks that we can turn to when we're really struggling. And again, that can help us nurture resilience. Now, in terms of thinking about ways to cope with stress, and as someone who is not an athlete, I always feel skeptical about putting exercise up at the top of a list because people, myself included, are like, somebody else telling me I need to do this. And I don't want you to think about it in terms of any sort of competition or anything that you have to do. This is a really good way to discharge stress from our systems, right? And it can look a lot of different ways. I'm a walker, So I will do laps at my son's soccer field. That's one of those ways that I make use of this time that I otherwise, wouldn't really have something to do. And it helps me burn off some of the stress that I carry. Some folks are runners, good for those folks who they might be. No offense to any runners on here. I'm good friends with runners. It's just not my thing. But weightlifting, yoga, this can look a lot of different ways. And so, this is really about a way of us discharging stress. Mindfulness is another practice that can really be helpful in terms of managing stress. And we'll talk a little bit more about mindfulness on the next couple of slides. But sometimes when we say mindfulness, there's might be some pushback in terms of, I tried meditation. It's just not for me. I can't sit still. This isn't for me. And so there are other things like walking meditation or breathing exercises, that again, don't have to necessarily be sitting still for 20 minutes on the floor. This might look a lot of different ways. And so again, just it can look like having a cup of tea and just not doing anything as you enjoy that cup of tea, other than focus on what that whole process is like. With gratitude practices, this can look like looking for opportunities to say thank you. Some people do gratitude journals. This is really about thinking about those things where we're recognizing the supports that we're receiving, we're recognizing the gifts that other people have. And as we say thank you, as we engage with gratitude, it actually helps us find more things to even be grateful for. With journaling, I put up here, it doesn't have to be extensive. This could be my own negative reaction to journaling. I've never been good at it, but I really like to buy journals. So I have a lot of really beautiful notebooks that don't have any writing in them, or certainly not journaling. So some folks though are really, this is a practice that they take up and is really important to them. So if it works for you, then that's a way to really effectively cope with stress. We talk about, I talked about social supports already. We really just encourage you to talk with the folks that you trust, engage in creative activities. We've got art, music, stories, poems, all sorts of crafts. I don't know all of the different crafts I've tried in the last 18 months, but macrame might have been the most intensive one. And so we've had to put that away for a little bit. My cats were too excited about it. But the last piece too, is spending time with a pet. Being outside. Some of us might really like to garden or hike. Some of us might have our fur babies that really bring us a lot of joy. These are all things that we can engage with, things that we can do that help us cope with stress. What are some of the things that you all are already doing in terms of coping with stress? What are some of the things, your go-tos for stress management? You can drop those in the chat as well. While I take a drink. Oh, horseback riding. I'm also a little jealous now. So cycling, absolutely. The exercise piece. Baking, definitely. Walking, stitching or knitting. Playing piano, reading. That's a big one for me too. The dog park, Candy Crush, music, words with friends. That stresses me out too much. My mom and I really just argue with each other when we play Words with Friends. So that does not help me de-stress, but I am glad that this works for you. Coloring, being out in nature, therapy, swimming, there's all sorts of different things. And, we know that not everything that works for one person is going to work for someone else. Right? So we've got yoga, music, retail therapy. And yeah, this is something that I think a lot of folks need to work on, because we might just be tired at the end of the day. It's hard to think about doing something more when we're already exhausted. Spending time with friends, music, looking for opportunities to say thank you, reading and meditation, hiking, for the piece about, so this is something to work on. I worked for a period of time, dancing. I worked for a period of time in a domestic violence center, and we have that was a place where a lot of us would talk about self-care and have a hard time taking time to do that, because it's a tough job to hear what folks are going through, trying to help folks change those circumstances, and just all of those things that are barriers to change. And so really, we can start small and just kind of build on kind of individual promises that we make to ourselves, right? Like today, I'm gonna drink this bottle of water, right? We don't have to go full on to, the 64 ounces or whatever a day, because sometimes we can be like, well, I don't know if I can do that, but I can drink one, right? I can drink this glass of water today. I'm gonna spend 5 minutes to walk around the block. I'm gonna just take a moment and turn off the notifications on my email so I can work on this other project without the constant distraction. That's a type of self-care too. The retail therapy, this is one of those things where, again, for some folks that works really well, and for others, it can be that cyclical stress cycle too. So when we're paying attention to ourselves, right, we know what it is for us, right? Where is this something that's going to be helpful, or is this actually something that's not helping and is in fact contributing to more stress? When we think about managing stress, right, we are not going to get rid of all stress all the time. Right? That is not going to happen. And that's okay. And I think it can be helpful for us. Taking the smartwatch off. Yes, absolutely. Then we're not getting buzzed when, our son has another TikTok video to show us. But when we think about managing our stress, I think it's helpful for us to make sure that we're thinking about this in terms of what we're actually doing, right? We're not going to get rid of all of our stress. We don't have to in order to manage it, right? But what we need to do is start to be able to recognize when we're experiencing stress and what those different strategies are that can help us from preventing that stress from getting too big, right? To where it's overwhelming, to where it's not going to be a way for us to manage effectively through it, right? So when we think back to where we store stress in our bodies, when we think about how this might happen or show up in our conversations with different folks or interactions with different people, right? The earlier we can start to recognize when we are overstressed, the easier it is for us to use the strategies that we already named to help us manage that particular situation, right? So the earlier we respond, the more effective our response is. And so that's where, I know we had a few folks that they mentioned meditation, right? This is something where if we do this every day, it becomes a practice and no longer feels like we're having to carve out time for it. With different types of exercise, maybe we put that on our calendar. It just becomes a routine or a habit, so we don't have to do something extra. And so I really recommend starting with those things that we already know that we like to do, that we already know can help us de-stress, and trying to plan more to do those things, right? And it doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be every day, but just kind of starting to come back to those things with more frequency. And those things don't necessarily have to be expensive, right? So maybe retail therapy wouldn't necessarily fall into that inexpensive category, but being outside, being with the pet that we already have, right? These are things that don't have to cost anything. When we think about mindfulness, this kind of, like I mentioned before, this goes hand in hand with some meditation pieces too. But really, this is just a practice of paying attention. And so we talk about this most commonly with meditation. But what we're trying to do is really become aware of what is happening now. And so mindfulness helps us create space between what we're experiencing and how we react to it. Right. So when we think about what this does for stress, right, it might help us more quickly identify a stressor. It might help us more quickly identify when we need to be engaging with our stress reducing activities. It can also help us learn our emotions, right? And just be present with those emotions. Sometimes we want to get rid of emotions, but emotions just exist, right? They're not good or bad. They just are a signal to our response to what's happening. And so when we think about that, right, it becomes easier to sit with those experiences and just let them be. When we're engaged in mindfulness on a regular basis, it can really help us know when it's time to recharge, right? When we might need to do something more intensive in terms of self-care. What we do with mindfulness, and sometimes when we hear the word judgment just on its own, we judge it, right? Because it sounds judgmental, but we all are making judgments all of the time, right? We're always engaged in this process of sorting things out. And with mindfulness, this can help us move to a place where we're just letting things be, as opposed to determining whether something is good or bad or something that's just neutral, right? And so when we're making those decisions, right, if something's good, we're trying to grasp onto it for more. If something's bad, we're trying to flee from that experience or reject it. And if something's neutral, we're typically ignoring it. But with non-judgment, again, which is something that we cultivate in connection with mindfulness, this just lets us be present to that life experience, right? We don't have to make a decision about whether it's good, bad, or neutral. And this might seem, counterintuitive in the sense that, well, I didn't even know I was making a decision about something being good, bad, or neutral, right? But again, that mindfulness practice can help us just create that space. And that also helps us reduce our mental strain and mental load too. So I want to give a few minutes for questions. So let me just kind of quickly see. Oh, okay. I think we do have time to watch this video then, and then I'll open it up for questions if I didn't mess my presentation up here by going backwards. Here we go.
There is a story, usually attributed to the Native American tradition, which illuminates different ways of paying attention. An elder, talking to a child, says, "I have two wolves fighting in my heart. One wolf is fearful, vengeful, envious, resentful, and deceitful. The other wolf is compassionate, loving, generous, truthful, and peaceful." The child asks, "Which wolf will win the fight?" The elder responds, "The one I feed." That doesn't mean we try to deny or hurt or kill the angry wolf. If we did that, we'd end up in a long battle, all the while somehow making that wolf more powerful through our hostility and fear. Hating that wolf sucks the strength right out of us. Instead, we calmly pay attention to the angry wolf and let go of believing they have the answers. If we can do that, they end up lying down next to us, no longer an enemy. We help strengthen the kind and loving wolf, giving it nourishment and support so that we can follow it. That peaceful wolf can become our steady companion and show us the way through all kinds of different life experiences. Restful or chaotic, enjoyable or disappointing experiences may come and go, but we can have a guide with us through it all. This is what mindfulness can help you do. Mindfulness allows us to see our thoughts and feelings as they are beginning. It's very powerful to know what we're feeling as we're feeling it, know what we're thinking as we're thinking it. With mindfulness, we can choose what will strengthen and bring into action, and we can choose what we will gently let go of. We don't have to be at the mercy of old habits or old ways of thinking or old ways of being. We are empowered. It just takes practice.
All I do want to go ahead and open it up. The person speaking through that last video is Sharon Salzberg, and she is an excellent mindfulness coach, instructor, and will typically spend February. She does a free mindfulness series in February every year. But of course, you can find a lot of her things online just in general. So I'm going to go ahead and drop in the chat box the link to the simple mental health pain scale and the link to both of these videos. But do we have any questions? You can either type those in the chat, or you can raise your hand or unmute yourself if you'd like. I know we're at the kind of end of the day, so folks might be a little quieter, but again, just want to give you that time as well. All right, I'll put this last video in here. Okay. Well, Kale, I think I will turn it back over to you. I didn't see any hands or any questions in the chat box, so I'll send it back your way.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julia. That was so amazing and much needed information, things that we often forget to do as givers and servers in our everyday life. Y'all, if you don't have any questions or any feedback for Julia, that will be the end of our session. Next and last, we have our keynote from Morgan, who is the program manager for KDHE Home Visiting. And so please feel free to enjoy your break. If you do need anything, let us know, and we will see you at our closing session in about 15 minutes or so. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Kale. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Yes, thanks, Julia, for being here. I appreciate you.
See you soon.